It was Halloween night, and we stood outside the old costume shop at the edge of town, the one people whispered about for years. Its windows were boarded up, the paint on its walls peeled and faded, and a sign that once read "Costumes Galore" swung ominously in the wind. We all knew the rumors. The shop was cursed, shut down after a string of strange disappearances. But none of us believed it, not really. It was just another creepy story, something to give the place a spooky reputation. We were bored, and breaking in sounded like the perfect thrill. After all, what better way to spend Halloween night than sneaking into a haunted costume shop? The lock on the door was surprisingly easy to break, almost as if it wanted us to come inside. We stepped into the dark, musty air, flashlights cutting through the thick dust that hung in the air like smoke. The inside was just as eerie as the outside, filled with rows of mannequins dressed in elaborate lifelike costumes. Monsters, demons, and creatures of all kinds stood frozen in place, their glassy eyes following us as we moved deeper into the shop. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and every noise seemed amplified in the silence. We spread out, exploring the aisles, laughing nervously at the absurdity of it all. It was just an old shop filled with costumes, nothing more. But something about them felt wrong, as if they were watching us. One of us found a rack of costumes in the back corner. The costumes looked different from the rest, more detailed, more real. The fabric shimmered in the dim light, and the eyes on the masks seemed almost alive. "Let's try these on," someone suggested. It was meant as a joke, just a way to take the edge off the creepy atmosphere. We each picked a costume. I grabbed one that looked like a classic werewolf, complete with fur and claws. Another chose a tattered zombie costume, the kind with exposed bones and rotting flesh. The third, a dark, cloaked figure like the Grim Reaper himself. Slipping into the costumes was easy, too easy. The fabric molded to our skin like it was made for us. At first, we laughed, admiring how realistic they looked. But then, things started to change. My hands were growing. The claws on the costume weren't fake, they were real. Sharp, twisted nails sprouted from my fingers, and fur began to cover my arms. The others were changing too. The one in the zombie costume let out a scream as their skin started to rot, peeling away in chunks, revealing muscle and bone beneath. The one in the Grim Reaper costume went silent, standing unnervingly still as the shadows around them seemed to thicken, swallowing the light. Panic set in. We tried to rip the costumes off, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if they had fused with our bodies. Our screams echoed through the empty shop, but no one was around to hear. We ran for the door, but it slammed shut on its own, trapping us inside. The mannequins we had passed earlier were no longer standing still. Their heads slowly turned, watching us with lifeless eyes. One of them, a clown with a twisted, painted grin, stepped off its pedestal, its joints creaking as it moved toward us. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a joke, a stupid Halloween prank. But now we were trapped in this nightmare, and the costumes weren't coming off. Desperate, we scattered, searching for a way out, but the shop seemed to shift around us, the aisles twisting and turning, leading us in circles. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating us in darkness. As I ran, something caught my eye, a glimmer of light from the back room, faint but unmistakable. I called out and we regrouped, racing toward it, hoping it was an exit. But what we found was worse. The back room wasn't an exit. It was filled with more costumes, hundreds of them hanging from the ceiling like grotesque decorations. And in the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a small blackened artifact, an amulet pulsating with a sickly green glow. That's when it hit us. The stories were true. The shop was cursed, and the only way to break the curse was to find the artifact. But as we reached for it, the door to the room slammed shut, and we heard it. A low, guttural growl echoing through the walls. We weren't alone in the shop anymore. Something else was here. Something watching, and it wasn't going to let us leave. We froze, staring at the door as the growl echoed through the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The air was thick, oppressive, and the dim green light from the amulet cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it feel like the costumes hanging around us were alive, moving in the corner of our eyes. None of us dared speak. We were too scared, too shaken by what had just happened. My hands, no claws, trembled as I reached out to grab the amulet. The closer I got, the heavier the air seemed to become, like something was pressing down on me, warning me to stop. The moment my claw touched the surface of the amulet, a jolt of electricity shot through my body, and a cold, whispering voice filled the room. Once worn, never undone, the curse binds you to this place. I yanked my hand back, gasping in shock. The whisper faded, but its meaning hung in the air like a noose. The costumes weren't just changing us, they were binding us to the shop. We weren't just trapped. We were becoming part of the curse itself. "What do we do?" one of us whispered, their voice trembling with fear. "We have to destroy it," I said, staring at the amulet, but deep down, I wasn't sure if it would even work. This wasn't just some object we could smash and be done with. It felt alive, ancient, like it had been waiting for us. For anyone foolish enough to walk through the doors of this cursed shop. Suddenly, there was a crash behind us. We spun around and my blood ran cold. The clown mannequin, no longer lifeless, stood in the doorway, blocking our only exit. Its painted grin was wider now, unnaturally wide, its head tilted at a grotesque angle. And it was moving, slowly, deliberately, like it was toying with us. Without thinking, we bolted toward the shelves on the far side of the room, ducking behind racks of old, rotting costumes. The clown's footsteps were slow, dragging as it stalked us through the dark. Every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl, and the sound of its laughter, high-pitched and broken, echoed through the room. It was playing with us like a predator savoring its prey. I peeked through the racks, hoping to find another way out, but the room had shifted again. The shelves seemed taller, the walls further away. It was like the shop itself was alive, bending to the will of whatever evil force was controlling it. "We're not getting out of here," one of us whispered, their voice cracking with panic. "We're going to die in here." "Not if we break the curse," I hissed back, but the truth was I didn't know how. The amulet might be our only hope, but we couldn't get to it with that thing stalking us. The zombie costume wearer grabbed a loose pipe from the floor, their fingers, now skeletal, gripping it tightly. "We fight it," they said, though their voice betrayed their fear. "We take that clown down and grab the amulet. We end this." Before I could protest, they charged out from behind the shelves, swinging the pipe at the clown. The metal made contact with a sickening thud, but the clown didn't fall. Instead, it twisted its head toward them, its painted grin somehow growing wider. The laughter stopped, replaced by a low, rumbling growl. The clown lunged, faster than any of us could have imagined. I watched in horror as it grabbed the zombie costume wearer by the throat, lifting them off the ground with inhuman strength. Their screams echoed through the room as the clown's grip tightened, and in one swift motion, it slammed them into the ground. The room fell silent. The figure in the zombie costume wasn't moving. We were out of time. In that moment, I knew we had no choice. I leaped from my hiding spot, claws extended, and sprinted toward the amulet. The clown's head snapped in my direction, and it let out an enraged howl, but I didn't stop. I reached the pedestal, my fur-covered hand closing around the cursed object. The second I grabbed it, the room seemed to explode with noise. The mannequins, every last one of them, came to life, their once glassy eyes now glowing with a sickly light. They moved toward us, slowly at first, then faster, their twisted faces locked in expressions of grotesque joy. I backed away, clutching the amulet, unsure of what to do. The clown was closing in, the other mannequins not far behind. My mind raced. Destroy it, I thought. Break the curse. But before I could act, the room began to warp again. The walls bent, the floor shifted, and suddenly the shop itself seemed to swallow us. We were no longer in the back room. We were back at the entrance, facing rows of costumes, just as we had been when we first walked in. Except now everything was different. The shop was alive. The costumes watched us, their eyes glowing, and the once silent mannequins now moved freely, roaming the aisles like predators hunting in the dark. The cursed amulet throbbed in my hand, and I realized with a sickening dread that we weren't just wearing the costumes anymore. We were becoming them, and the night was far from over. The air was thick with dread, each breath felt heavier than the last. I could feel the cursed amulet pulsing in my hand, its power vibrating through my body, and I knew, deep down, that it was controlling everything. The shop had turned into a twisted labyrinth, the walls shifting, closing in, trapping us inside this nightmare. Every costume, every mannequin moved with a malicious intent, their eyes glowing in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. I looked down at my arms. Thick fur covered every inch. The claws that had once been part of the costume were now my own. The transformation was spreading. My face felt different, sharper, like a snout was beginning to form. Panic surged through me. I had to stop this. We had to stop this. But how? How could we break the curse when we didn't even understand it? "Where's the zombie?" I whispered, scanning the aisles, my voice shaking with fear. Silence. The other costume wearer who had charged the clown was gone, vanished. I wasn't sure if the clown had killed them or if something worse had happened, but whatever it was, I knew we couldn't waste time. The shop was consuming us piece by piece, costume by costume. We had to act fast. The one in the Grim Reaper costume was with me, their face obscured by the dark hood. They hadn't said a word since the transformation began. I wasn't even sure if they were still themselves. Something about them seemed off. Their movements were slow, methodical, like they weren't in control anymore. I reached out to them, hoping for some reassurance. But before I could speak, a sound, low, guttural, rose from behind us. A shuffle, then a dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My heart sank. We turned slowly, our flashlights flickering against the shifting shadows. There, at the far end of the aisle, was the figure in the zombie costume. But something was terribly wrong. Their skin had decayed even more, chunks of flesh hanging loosely from their bones. Their eyes, once wide with fear, were now dull, lifeless. They shuffled toward us, their movements jerky, unnatural, as if they were being controlled like a puppet on strings. "Oh my God," I muttered, stepping back. "They're turning into the zombie, for real." The Grim Reaper stood still, watching, their head tilted slightly. They didn't move, didn't react as the zombie shuffled closer. I grabbed their arm, pulling them back with me, but they resisted, staying rooted to the spot. "What are you doing?" I hissed, panic rising in my throat. "We have to go!" The zombie costume wearer let out a low moan, their mouth hanging open, revealing a gaping black void where teeth should have been. I stumbled back, horrified, as they reached out, their bony fingers stretching toward us. They were no longer human, just a rotting shell of who they once were. Suddenly, the Grim Reaper stepped forward, silently moving toward the zombie. My stomach twisted in confusion and terror. What were they doing? Why weren't they running? I watched in horror as they raised their hand, the shadows around them thickening, swirling like smoke. Without a word, they reached out and touched the zombie's chest. The room seemed to vibrate, a deep, resonant hum filling the air. And then the zombie crumbled. Their body collapsed into a pile of dust and bones, scattering across the floor in a heap of decay. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. The Grim Reaper lowered their hand, the dark energy fading, and turned to face me. For the first time since we'd entered the shop, they spoke. "We can't leave," they whispered, their voice low and hollow, like the wind through a crypt. "Not until the curse is broken." I stared at them, my skin crawling. What are you?" They lifted their hood slightly, just enough for me to see the hollow black pits where their eyes should have been. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, horrified. They weren't human anymore. Whatever they were, the costume had consumed them completely. Before I could react, the shop shifted again. The walls groaned, the floorboards buckled beneath us, and suddenly, the shelves around us collapsed, revealing a long, narrow hallway leading into the depths of the shop. At the end of the hallway, I could see it, the amulet's green glow pulsing like a heartbeat, casting twisted shadows on the walls. "We have to destroy it," the Grim Reaper said, their voice unnervingly calm. I didn't argue. There was no time to think, no time to question what was happening. All I knew was that if we didn't end this, we would become like the others, twisted, hollow versions of ourselves, trapped in this cursed place forever. We moved quickly, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The air grew colder the closer we got to the glow, and I could feel the curse tightening around us, pulling us deeper into its web. As we reached the end of the hallway, the source of the light became clear. It wasn't just the amulet, it was something else. Something far worse. There, standing in the center of the room, was a figure. Tall, shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing the same sickly green as the amulet. It held the cursed object in its hand, turning it slowly, watching us as we approached. A grin spread across its face, and I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. This wasn't just a cursed object. It was alive, feeding off our fear, off the transformations we were going through. "We've been waiting," the figure said, its voice low and filled with malice. "Now let the real fun begin." The Grim Reaper stepped forward, their hand outstretched, but before they could act, the figure moved faster than I could see. It lunged, grabbing the Grim Reaper by the throat, lifting them into the air with ease. "Only one of you will make it out alive," it hissed, turning its glowing eyes toward me. "The question is, who will it be?" The shop groaned around us, the walls bending inward, and I realized with bone-chilling certainty that this was only the beginning of the nightmare. The real horror had yet to come. The figure's glowing eyes bore into mine, and for a moment I felt paralyzed, frozen in place as the Grim Reaper costume wearer dangled in its grasp. The air crackled with dark energy, and it felt like the shop itself was closing in on us, suffocating us in its cursed grip. The figure's grin widened, its grip tightening around my friend's throat, and I knew I had only seconds to act. Without thinking, I lunged forward, the cursed amulet still pulsing in my hand. I had no plan, no idea what to do, but something deep inside told me that the amulet was the key. It had to be. It was the source of all this horror, and if I could destroy it, maybe, just maybe, we could break the curse and end this nightmare. The figure's eyes flickered as it noticed my movement. but I was faster than it expected. I raised the amulet high and slammed it into the ground with all the strength I had left. The moment it hit the floor, a deafening crack echoed through the room, and the ground beneath us split open. The figure let out a howl of rage, dropping the Grim Reaper as a surge of green light erupted from the broken amulet. The light spread like wildfire, engulfing the entire shop in a blinding flash. I stumbled backwards, shielding my eyes from the intense glow, but I could feel it. The curse was breaking. The shop groaned and trembled as if it were coming apart at the seams. The mannequins that had been stalking us crumbled into dust, their glowing eyes fading into darkness. The costumes that had fused to our bodies began to loosen, the monstrous fur and claws retreating, the rotting flesh of the zombie vanishing. I could feel myself changing back, my hands shrinking, the fur disappearing, my face returning to its human form. I glanced over at the Grim Reaper, who lay on the floor, their hood falling back to reveal a familiar, terrified face. They were themselves again, just like me. The figure, the one that had been holding the amulet, was no longer grinning. It howled in fury as the green light consumed it, its body dissolving into nothingness. "No!" it screamed, its voice echoing through the collapsing shop. "You can't escape, the curse will live on." But before it could finish, the light swallowed it whole, and the shop fell silent. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing. The shop was still. No more shifting walls, no more glowing eyes, no more monstrous costumes. It was just a decrepit, dusty old shop again, as if the curse had never existed. I looked down at my hands, human hands, trembling but whole. It was over. We were free. The Grim Reaper costume wearer, now back to normal, sat up slowly, rubbing their neck where the figure had grabbed them. "Is it really done?" they asked, their voice hoarse and disbelieving. I nodded, still in shock. "I think so. We broke the curse." We helped each other to our feet, our bodies weak but intact. The shop, once a maze of horrors, now seemed small and insignificant. The rows of costumes were lifeless, just old, decaying fabric hanging from mannequins. There was nothing left of the terror that had nearly consumed us. We made our way to the front door, which had somehow swung open, letting in the cool, fresh air of the outside world. It felt surreal, stepping out into the quiet Halloween night, leaving the horrors of the costume shop behind us. The streetlights flickered softly, and the distant sounds of trick-or-treaters echoed through the neighborhood, as if nothing unusual had happened. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing in the freedom we had thought we'd never feel again. I turned to the others, a shaky smile forming on my face. We made it. We survived. A laugh, nervous but real, escaped from my friend. "I can't believe it. We actually made it." We walked away from the shop, leaving its cursed walls behind. The amulet was gone, shattered into oblivion, and with it, the curse that had plagued the place for decades. I glanced back one last time, half expecting the shop to vanish or crumble into dust, but it remained, silent and still, just another forgotten relic of the past. As we walked into the night, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. We had faced the monsters, survived the nightmare, and broken the curse that had claimed so many before us. And now we were free. But as we turned the corner, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shop wasn't done with us yet. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was the lingering fear from what we'd been through. But I could have sworn I heard a soft, eerie whisper carried on the wind. Until next Halloween. I shivered but smiled. Whatever evil had been in that shop was gone now. And as far as I was concerned, Halloween night would never be the same again. But this time it had a happy ending. For us.